So we recently published a report which is called the Loss of Control Playbook, Degrees, Dynamics, and Preparedness. And in this short video, we're going to talk about chapter 2 of the report, which looks at actionable interventions that we could take around loss of control. So yeah, maybe you could just start by talking us through the motivation behind proposing interventions which are based around the deployment context, the affordances, and the permissions that you can give an AI system, or as we term it, the DAP framework.
Yeah, so we wanted to focus on interventions that are actionable today. And while capabilities and propensities are sort of obvious ways to measure risk, they have some downsides. Starting with what exactly is the capability that will cause loss of control? So, what exactly are we measuring here? We're not quite sure. Then, secondly, capabilities aren't necessarily sort of a monolith, they have sort of sub capabilities that you also need to sufficiently measure in order to get an accurate measurement of the capability itself. So AR&D might consist of research, coding, long-term horizon planning. It's not a monolith. And then thirdly, we don't know at what point any given capability becomes sort of a threshold for loss of control risk, and therefore when we need to sort of intervene. And then finally, it's likely that loss of control doesn't materialize because of a single capability, but it's probably going to be sort of a set of them. So maybe cyber and long-term horizon planning and deception. And we don't know how these risks might compound. So what percentage of cyber risk, in addition to some other percentage of deception risk, is at a threshold for loss of control. So there's a lot of uncertainty here, but AI systems are being deployed every day. And so we wanted to offer something that deployers can implement right now for the systems that they're deploying to address sort of the risks of tomorrow. And the answer we came up with is focusing on deployment context, affordances, and permissions.
And then maybe you can talk us through what using the DAP framework actually entails, what it means to focus on these different aspects.
Yeah. So at a high level, it involves considering three things. The deployment context, so that's the environment you're deploying it in, the AI system in, and the use case you're deploying it for, the affordances you give it, so sort of what it can do in the environment, and the permissions that you give it, so what is it authorized to do. And maybe, for example, it only has the permission to view certain sites, even if you give it the affordance of viewing the internet. And this largely allows us to sidestep the issue of capabilities that I mentioned earlier and allows you to focus on sort of these concrete measures in practice.
I think it would also be useful for you to just talk through each of these three parts in turn. For example, you can maybe explain what exactly is an AI system's deployment context.
Yeah, so it's the combination of the environment that it's in. So this could be something as broad as military. And then in that environment, what is the use case? And this is an important distinction because you can imagine different use cases in an environment having quite different risk profiles. So, for example, in a military environment, you might have the use case of transliterating archival documents, which is sort of a more low stakes implementation. And then you could have an automated targeting system, which is obviously more high stakes, even though the same environment, it's a different use case and therefore a different context. And so, for example, an automated targeting system would be something that we would consider more high stakes.
Maybe you can say a bit more as well, actually, about what characterizes high-stakes deployment contexts.
Yeah, so we don't provide a definitive list of what all of the high stakes deployment contexts that we think exist, but we do suggest some characteristics. First of which is if the AI system malfunction, a high probability that this will have severe consequences. So, missile targeting system targets something that it's not intended to, fires a missile, severe consequences. And then on the other hand, that they are highly complex and have the high potential for cascading failures. So if that system fails, maybe it causes another system to fail and it sort of cascades into more severe consequences on one hand, but also where they have the potential that humans are not able to oversee this cascade of failures because it's maybe too rapid. So, for example, we propose that critical national infrastructure is one such case where we probably have use cases in this environment that will be high stakes, and also in the military for obvious reasons. And these are also ones that appear in our scenarios that we found in chapter 1. So they appear to be sort of top of mind for people talking about loss of control.
And in addition to military contexts and critical national infrastructure, we also flag the automation of AI R&D as another potential high-stakes deployment context in the paper.
Right. So we don't have that much insight into military deployments for obvious reasons of national security, but we do know that AI companies are targeting AI R&D as something they specifically want to achieve via their AI development. So OpenAI has talked about an automated researcher by 2028, for example. So we know it's going to be deployed there, and we also know that there's sort of rapid improvement of AI capabilities in that area, sort of with Claude Code, for example, and hence probably an increase of the risk of loss of control via sort of an intelligence explosion potentially. So we would probably call that a high stakes deployment context for that reason.
Okay, let's put a stopper in this little tangent on high stakes deployment contexts and maybe get back onto talking a bit more about the affordances and permissions part of the DAP framework.
Yeah, so affordances are basically what opportunities does the AI have to sort of affect the world. So an affordance could be internet access, for example. Without internet access, your AI has to rely on its internal knowledge to answer your questions, and with internet access, it obviously has a lot more access to more up-to-date information, for example. So you're expanding its range of possible actions. Now it can conduct searches, it can find more information. That means, inversely, if you don't give it a certain affordance, then it will have a smaller range of possible actions, which might mean it's safer. So if you don't give your AI the affordance to send emails, it won't be able to send spam emails either. And then for permissions, they determine what an AI is authorized to do. So a simple analogy is admin access on a computer. So an admin might have a wider range of things that they're authorized to do on a system, but that also means they are sort of more at risk of having of doing something wrong, of something going wrong with what they're doing. And this is the same for AI systems. So if the AI system has more permissions, it's more capable of making errors that are more wide-reaching. And then at the same time, when you give an AI a certain permission, you by definition lose a bit of oversight over it. So if the AI system doesn't have to ask you specifically, can I do this thing? You might not be able to realize that they're doing that. So for example, if you say you can do financial transactions up to $50, then it won't ask you, and so you might have a bunch of transactions for $49.99 piling up without your knowledge.
Right. And then we also talk about, for each of the parts of the framework, we give some corresponding interventions or mitigations that you can use to try and reduce risk.
Yeah, so first you should probably determine if your deployment context is high stakes. That sort of informs the level of protection and caution that you want to be aiming for. So probably your email assistant use case will just be lower stakes than your wastewater management system controller. So you can get away with being a little less cautious in some situations because the consequences of the failure are just less severe. And then maybe in some cases, the consequences of failure are very severe, and you might want to decide to reject that deployment completely because it's too risky. For example, people have been talking about never putting AI in direct control of nuclear weapons because it is such a high risk scenario. And then on top of that, you would want to assess your deployment context for cascading failures. What systems rely on this system? What systems might fail as a result of this system failing, hence having a greater or more severe outcome emerge from that. And you might want to limit those connections to those other systems. So consider the stakes and how failures might affect other systems and adjust accordingly.
So that's deployment context. And then can you also talk us through some of the interventions for affordances permissions as well?
Yeah, so generally we think about considering what affordances and permissions are actually required for the use case, and then restricting the AI system to just those. So not just giving the AI the ability to do something because you think it might be useful later, or you just don't really mind that it has those. If you don't need the AI system to do something right now, just don't let it be able to do it, is sort of the principle here. So when you give an AI an affordance, you have to consider every possible thing that the AI might be able to do with this affordance, not assume that it will stick to the things that you intend it to do. So yes, you might not intend it to send a spam email, for example, but if it can send it, you should assume that at some point it might happen for whatever reason. And then when you give permissions, again, you need to consider your decrease in oversight. Is that worth it? And then finally, you need to think about the human factor in any deployment context, which is to say that humans might not accurately assess what affordances and permissions the AI system actually needs. So if the AI says, oh, I need this permission in order to complete this task, maybe a user will believe it. And therefore, suddenly now it has more permissions, more affordances, and can take more actions. So you need to consider maybe informing the user appropriately about these types of interventions. So yeah, these are the things that we think are actionable today to mitigate risk.
But we do also suggest in the paper that we think there might be some challenges in using this framework in the long run.
Yeah, we think there's two challenges to limiting deployment context affordances and permissions. The first of which is just you don't always want to limit them because they, by definition, limit what the AI can in fact do and therefore the usefulness of the AI. And there's growing economic and strategic incentives to deploy more and more AI systems in more and more situations. And as they grow more capable, they'll also be able to be deployed in those contexts. And then secondly, a sufficiently advanced AI system might be able to circumvent any controls that we place on it of this nature. So it might be able to be super persuasive, or it might be able to find sort of zero-day vulnerabilities in what you place around it and find ways to escalate its permissions, for example. So if you're building a wall around the AI, this would be the AI tunneling under it. So we have to consider what to do in that situation, and we talk about that in chapter 3.
Nice. We'll finish there, so thank you for watching. If you're interested in reading more about the paper, you can go to our website at apolloresearch.ai. Also on our website is links to all of our other work as well.